Hello, everyone. I am here today to review and talk about the new film directed by Bradley Cooper, starring Bradley and Lady Gaga, titled A Star is Born, which was just released in the US and worldwide this last Friday, October 5th, 2018. Oh boy, I've been looking forward to this movie. I believe it was announced about 2 years ago, and I actually talked about, because I already filmed a review of the song The Shallow from the soundtrack, which I'll link in the description, so I won't spend too much time talking about that specific track. I talk about how in Gaga's career, this film is coming at an interesting time. You know, she's celebrating 10 years of the fame this current year, and she has, already performed at the Super Bowl. She's a household name. She almost feels as though she's entering a new era in terms of her fame, and the fact that she's going now for an Oscar is something I think that is a natural step in someone's career like hers. However, there's a lot of similarities to the actual image and persona and the music of her last album, Joanne, which was released 2 years ago this month, to this film, A Star is Born, which is coming 2 years later. And as I said in the Shallow review, I believe Gaga was not aware that she was actually going to be in this film while she was recording Joanne, and it wasn't until the album was wrapping up that she figured that whole thing started rolling, and it was sort of a coincidence that I think these two projects ended up being back to back because they are so similar in the music, in the style, in the stripped down, authentic girl next door creation. This is a character that doesn't really feel properly addressed as Lady Gaga. That name feels like it belongs to some other performer that's, retired for a little while. We haven't really seen her since Art Pop. And the fact that Stephanie has come out so much more in, less makeup and just herself is really endearing. However, I talk about in The Shallow, I do feel almost like it's a little unfortunate that we're getting these two things back to back. As a Gaga fan, I am definitely interested in seeing Lady Gaga return to a little bit more of an experimental, hyper creative sort of mode again, because it has been a little while since we've gotten that side of her. It's been about 5 years, and it's starting to get a little bit tiring seeing her kind of just do these very cute folk acoustic songs. But don't get me wrong, the music is phenomenal on this film, and I'm going to talk about the film first, and then I'm going to talk about the soundtrack, because I'm going to talk about both in one. But I just had to address that there are a lot of songs on this soundtrack that I think would have been 10 times better than a lot of the songs that were on Joanne. If you replaced those songs or something, Joanne would have been an even better record. And I think Joanne is still a very strong record. I'll also link my Joanne review. I give it, a lot of accolades. There are some issues I have with it, of course. And so before I get into the music too much more, let me go ahead and just talk about this film. This is Bradley Cooper's directorial debut, and I would say he does quite a good job. This is the fourth installment of this remake of this story that has been told. The first was in the 30s, I believe, with Janet Gaynor, and there was no music. And then Judy Garland did a rendition in the 50s, I believe. And then in the 70s, Barbra Streisand with Chris Christopherson. That was the one I had been familiar with before. I still have not seen the 70s version yet. And now, of course, we go, 40 years later. As someone said, they skipped the 90s. They should have done A Star is Born in the 90s. Now we get the present day Bradley Cooper, Lady Gaga pairing. And I definitely see that cast as a strong, nod to Chris Christopherson and Barbra Streisand. I see echoes of both of them in each other, and I think they're perfect for their roles. And I think that the story, I wasn't 100% sure at first if it was going to be set in the present day, but I kind of knew it was eventually as we learned more about it. I think that the story is a very good adaptation of that tale as old as time, so to speak, the story of a male rocker musician taking under his wing and falling in love with a young protege, ingenue, who is, who's very timid and shy about expressing her true creative passion, and ultimately ends up surpassing in fame her lover, and she doesn't want to do that, so she's struggling to sacrifice her career for him, and then it ends. I'm not going to give too much away because I don't, for no one who's familiar with the story, I don't want to give too much away. But it is a dramatic romance story at the heart of it. And I was definitely, going into it just thinking, well, there are certain things that are just going to be cute, that are going to be a little cliche. But you know what? I'm interested to see how they mold and adapt this story and make it like fresh and exciting. And I think that in the camera work and in the photography and in the obviously the casting itself, I think we see a very modern, very sleek, very well photographed production of a classic that could drag a little bit if we were to just rehash the 70s version. I've heard that it's a little plodding. So, there's some things that I think on a technical level that are excelled at in this current version, which is good to know. I know there's a lot of Oscar buzz around Bradley and Lady Gaga's names. I was just thinking though in the theater coming home, how often is it that the Oscars nominate for lead male and female actress two actors from the same film? I don't know how frequent that is. Usually they pick one and they kind of put all of their, nomination power behind that. And it's a little tricky, Bradley Cooper or Lady Gaga, which one should get it? Honestly, I would say both of them deserve. Bradley Cooper's performance, now, first of all, you shouldn't be sleeping on his singing ability, and none of us should have been. It's not too surprising that someone like him who has some singing talent, which if he was going to do this film, you have to have some singing talent. Like, he wouldn't have gone into this blind. He knew what he was getting himself into. And it's good that he finally got to showcase that, because he has an amazing voice. It's silky smooth, it's raw, and yet it still has this growl to it. It would be a great country rock star from the 70s, for sure. He definitely has that, like an edgier Bruce Springsteen type aesthetic. And a deep voice, which, oh my God, I mean, Bradley has probably already a deeper voice, but the accent and the voice that he has, he's from Arizona in the film, is so deep. It's like a growl. And the person who plays his older brother, not his father, his older brother, is the actor Sam Elliott. He has such a deep voice, of course, naturally. And so there are several moments in the film where it's just how deep can a voice go, as they kind of have a deep voice competition with each other. And of course, there's a lot of expletives in this movie. Not something I was surprised by, but boy, particularly between those two characters, Sam Elliott's and Cooper's, there is like an expletive in every other word, and I was sitting there like, even for me, this is getting a little much. And it was just, be prepared for that. But, at the same time, these are they're playing each other as being, I don't want to say hicks, but being a little bit more redneck. And, there's a lot of dramatic kind of familiar stuff that goes on, and I won't get too much into that, but that is part of it. So Gaga is much more, a modern cosmopolitan girl, but she's also so down to earth in her character of Ally. I don't know if we ever get a last name for her. She's just Ally. And I'm not going to summarize the whole film here, because this review could get really long. But Gaga ultimately feels a lot like she's playing herself. And obviously there are so many parallels in terms of her career trajectory and Ally's career trajectory. Obviously, though, and Gaga states this in interviews, Ally is a character who's in her 30s, who's only just starting to get into possibly performing her songs live. She's a songwriter, but she's what she calls a closet songwriter. She doesn't want to admit that she is to anyone, and she doesn't say she wants to sing her own songs because no one thinks she looks good enough to sing them. She's better behind camera. And because of her nose, like all these, silly but like very true things that people will say to people in the business. And Gaga, had a very much more kind of like 19, she was living on her own in the Upper East Side and trying to make it as a dive bar singer, like she was really hustling at an early age. And it wasn't just about, I want to write songs. It's about, I want to write songs, but I want to perform them, and I'm always going to be the one performing them. So, that was a much more kind of a assertive attitude that she had at a younger age. But there are a lot of similarities between Ally's character and Stephanie, or Gaga herself, and her trajectory. And you can see that parallel in the fact that, Gaga then became more manufactured, although I still believe that Gaga had a lot of say in her fame imagery and all of these things. It wasn't just purely Interscope Records doing this to her, but, she was manufactured a bit to be more palatable to radio. And if you do a song with Flo Rida, you're going to get a lot of traction. If you do a song with this person, if you have these backup dancers, if you do this, that, very micromanaged. And then ultimately in the film and also in Gaga's career, she's been dismantling that again. And so it's interesting that in both Ally and Gaga's case, there's a fundamental background of traditional love of classical singer, of songwriting and singing that is sort of then built upon to become a pop star and go in a different genre. And then at the end, that kind of all is broken down again. And I find that dynamic interesting that it is almost autobiographical about Gaga's career. If there's anything, about the film without giving things too much away that I, find, I mean, it's a longer film, and there are, certain scenes that obviously in my head I would think I would do a little differently, but it definitely didn't feel boring. I mean, obviously I'm interested in Gaga, but it's a very plain story in some ways, and I'm used to kind of wanting to go to the movies and like there needs to be a little bit more, especially if we're doing a remake of a remake of a remake of a remake. And it keeps you engaged. The just brilliant screenwriting and the relatability. It really feels like a snapshot into these characters' lives. It's very well handled, and I definitely see Oscar contention for this film. It's just, is it going to be Gaga that gets a lot of that buzz, or is it going to be Bradley? Bradley, has some very dynamic performances. Gaga is a little bit more subdued in her character, but the fact that she is not necessarily an actress first and she performs, I think, a very good performance, makes her performance just as stand out as Bradley's. Bradley could get the directing chops, and Gaga could get the actress chops. So I'll be interested to see come award season what happens for this film. But as a transition into talking about the music, the one thing I think we can all guarantee is that any other film that's releasing original music for contention for this year's Oscars, they can just go home because it is a guarantee that this film is going to get Best Original Song and probably Best Soundtrack Recording. But definitely Best Original Song. Now, which song, I'm not entirely sure. There are several you could choose for that category. It could be The Shallow. I actually think The Shallow is not the strongest song. I think The Shallow has the potential to be stronger, but I think the live version that we get in the soundtrack is just the prototype. She actually performs The Shallow in a much more kind of full-bodied way in a part of a concert in the film itself. And I really wish we got that studio version. I don't know if we ever will. But it could be, I'll Never Love Again, which is the closing song, which is so emotional and so beautiful. Or Always Remember Us This Way. These are some of the best songs, I think, from the soundtrack. So let's talk about the soundtrack. There's definitely a lot of Bradley Cooper crooning. There's some guitar solos. Like I said, a bit rockier, a bit edgier Bruce Springsteen with a bit of country in there. That's what you're getting, and it's not necessarily my cup of tea, so it's not like I'm going to buy or download or listen to those songs, though maybe This Time is probably my favorite of the Bradley Cooper solos, just because it's a lot more folk acoustic, and it's beautiful, and it's endearing, and it focuses more on his silky vocals, and I like the lyrical content. There are some duets that are beautiful. Music to My Eyes is probably my favorite duet of the two of them. It's just played interspersed in a scene in the film. And I love that phrase, music to my eyes. I think it's just, it amplifies the sort of connection that I think Jackson Maine, who is the name of this Bradley Cooper's character in the film, and Ally, it just perfectly describes their relationship as, uh, it was such a clumsy kind of falling into each other kind of relationship and a meeting of an ego with someone who's got no ego, and the way they kind of complemented each other on the road, and both used their talents to uplift each other, at least at the beginning, was, I think, very endearing, and it comes across in that song beautifully. I think I Don't Know What Love is another highlight moment. And then we get to some of the more experimental tracks. So there's a song called Look What I Found, which is a much more kind of jazzy piano pop song. It reminds me of something Sarah Bareilles would sing. It's very show-tuney, and there are a lot of show-tune inclinations on this record, similar to Joanne. And this album is a bit of all over the place in genre, as we do go more into territory of EDM pop, with songs like Heal Me, Why Did You Do That, and Hair, Body, Face. When I saw a song title called Hair, Body, Face, I was thinking, that's a bit more of a Lady Gaga 2011 title, isn't it? Like, that's much more like what I would consider high school Gaga, because that's like, or maybe even, 2013 art pop, that era. And boy, is that a song for the gays, so to speak. Now, I think it's kind of ironic. I was seeing someone comment that those songs are meant to sound really fake. And because I was listening to them and I got like all this hype around them, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be like old Gaga. This is DJ White Shadow is involved. Like, oh my God, like this is really exciting. And it just felt hollow. It didn't feel like Gaga was suited for the song at all. It felt empty and very boring, especially Hair, Body, Face. I'm sorry, I don't find anything that makes me want to come back to it. It sounds like a demo of a song about someone who doesn't really care about music. And, it's so different from the character of someone who's writing their own music and wanting to perform and be so emotionally impactful. And then you have a song like this. Now, if you contrast that to the film's narrative, that's kind of the story. The film was, she was becoming micromanaged by this manager at that point. And Bradley's character was starting to realize that. And he was like, look at these lyrics. Like, what are you even singing? Is this what you want to be doing? And that question does come up, and she's like, well, this is what's going to pay the bills. And, this is what's going to get me to go and connect with audiences all over the world on tour. And so that question of sellability and management is, I think, a really interesting question that comes up in the film story. And I don't know if it's unique to this one or if the Barbra Streisand one had a similar narrative or story arc. And I do think that, you can't tame the Barbra, the inner Barbra that is Gaga, and make her suddenly sound vapid again. And if you're going to make her sound vapid, make it good, make it infectious, make it bubbly, make it have that flair and that character and personality, which she had on songs like on the Fame record, for example. A lot of people are comparing it to that in style and sound. And this does not hold a candle to any of those songs. Why Did You Do That is much more beat driven, and it's much more like Chainsmokers, kind of that. It's just not for me. It's a bit cringy, and I think the film tries to make it look cringy, and I think Little Monsters who are in love with that, and only want that side of Gaga, it's like, I understand we want the EDM, we want the dance, we want all that back. I do too. But I want it to be good, and I want it to be authentic. And these songs aren't the worst thing in the world, but they're kind of meant to be a little bit of a joke. That's how I'm viewing them. Heal Me is a little stronger. There's more of like that power behind it, that emotion behind it, but it still feels very synthetic and a little bit fake. So it doesn't do that much for me. Gaga just doesn't really feel like Gaga anymore. And it could just be any generic female singer. So those are my queries with those songs. Now, the big moments on this record are obviously the ballads. And some people be like, oh, there's just so many ballads. These ballads, there are three real big ones. Called Is That Alright, which plays during the end credits of the film. Always Remember Us This Way, which is a little bit more of a rock anthem. And it is so beautiful. It reminds me of Elton John. And there's the bittersweet, tear-jerking I'll Never Love Again, which she performs at the end of the film. And there's an extended version on the soundtrack, which I highly recommend because it just adds all extra emotion in there. And all three are exquisite. I would definitely say I'll Never Love Again is probably one of the best songs on this record, just because of the raw emotion. It definitely feels very Barbra Streisand. It feels classical. It feels dignified, elegant, emotional, everything that you could want. And something that, honestly, I really wish Joanne had more of, because the ballads on Joanne, like Million Reasons and Angel Down, they're very lackluster, in my opinion, compared to songs like this. I mean, this is a song to bring the emotion to the table. And I feel like this is a song that has that power of, connecting across an audience. And I really would love to see her perform it at the Oscars. However, it would be very emotional for her. She has revealed that when she recorded the singing of this song, because all of the recording was done live, singing to a microphone, not live playback, when they recorded and filmed, her friend Sonia had passed away from cancer that same day that she took that take. And that, if you know the storyline of the film, that just adds so much more emotion to that performance. I'm not going to say much more there because I don't want to give too much away about the film, but having that added and watching that, just knowing that and how emotional that would be, the song was also for Sonia. And that's a truly emotional kind of dimension to add there. Losing a friend to cancer and just missing them by a few minutes. She talks about in the lyrics, if I could have been there, if I could have one more moment with you, that brings it all back. And I can imagine it'd be very difficult for her to perform it live without tearing up and without feeling that. And Similar to the Joanne, Where Do You Think You're Going piano version, which I thought was a much more beautiful stripped down version of Joanne, which is a beautiful song off of that record. They both have that kind of feel to it. It's just sentimental, nostalgic, beautiful, graceful, reflective. But the rest of it is just pure, like real pure, powerful vocals, triumphant. Always remember us this way. It just brings a smile to my face. It's beautiful. It's exquisite. Is that all right? The power behind her the power behind her voice. I guess they should also talk about La Vie en Rose. It's at the beginning of the soundtrack. It's just a great, showcase of her vocal talent as she sings that classic Edith Piaf song. Um, it reminds me a lot of her Tony Bennett stuff. And it's not necessarily my cup of tea. I love that song, but I'm not so into that style of music. But again, she brings her A game to the table for that as well. There are a lot of big name songwriters involved in creating the songs on this soundtrack, like Julia Michaels, Laurie McKenna. They were all involved, and so it was a lot of talent coming together to try and craft this film and make it right. All in all, it is a beautiful, emotional film that I do think all of us should see. It deserves to do really well at the box office. And I'll be really curious to see what the Oscar buzz around this and where the Oscar buzz fixates on, the actual talent that was involved in this film. But I highly recommend you check out the soundtrack. And I highly recommend you check out the film before you listen to too much of the soundtrack, because I did it the other way around, but I really think it would have even more of an impact if you're hearing the songs for the first time watching the movie. I think it'll just give it that extra excitement, because it's like, oh, what's she gonna sing next? I don't know, and it's all new and fresh. But either way, it's still an exciting experience. So I highly recommend you go and see this film. It does bring something new to the table. I mean, some of it, is just a bit predictable, I guess you could say in parts, but it's a story that's been told a lot of times before. But there's always heart behind it. There's always that emotional connection, and that was important. That was there, because if it didn't have that in the way the film was made, it would really just fall flat on its face, and you'd be asking, why was this made? Was this just a cash grab to put Lady Gaga's name in a film? I was really worried that was going to be the case, and it is not, thankfully. I hope you enjoyed this review. Go see A Star is Born in theaters. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Please give this a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll link my Joanne and Shallow reviews in the description below. Love you all so much. Peace, love, and light. Bye.